Welcome to The Kingstonians, a program that profiles individuals who are passionate about what they do for a living, about what organization they belong to, or simply passionate about the community they are a part of. Good morning, my name is Dave Cunningham, and on today's program, John and Mark Gerretsen, a father and son with a passion for politics. Welcome, gentlemen.
It's good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Now, what I'd like to do on the program today is talk about the public service end of things with respect to politicians as opposed to philosophies, and I think we should set the table a little bit before we get into our conversation. John, you served 16 years on City Council, 8 years as mayor, and then you moved to Toronto and served 19 years in the Provincial Legislature, 11 as a cabinet minister.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And Mark, 8 years on City Council, 4 as mayor, and last October you were elected to represent Kingston and the Islands in Ottawa.
That's right.
Okay. Now, if you're a news junkie like I am, you have to watch the news on a regular basis, and a lot of the time when we watch the news, politicians don't always get a flattering review of their activities. And that applies to municipal, provincial, and federal. And the complicating factor right now as we record this interview is the fact that we have wall-to-wall coverage of two politicians duking it out south of the border, and not much of it is very nice. So my first question is, why did you each get involved in politics to start with? John?
Okay. I started my practice as a lawyer here in Kingston back in the summer of 1971, and my landlord at that time was a fellow by the name of George Vosper, who had been on council a number of years, and he was a well-known man in the community. And after I was in practice for about a year, he said, you should run for council. Lawyers couldn't advertise in those days. He said, it'll give your law practice a little bit of visibility, and you probably won't win, but run anyway. So I did run for council in an area of the city where I was basically raised in, the Portsmouth area, Portsmouth and Polson Park area. There was an empty spot to the extent that the then councillor George Spiel ran for mayor, so there was an empty spot in the Portsmouth area. And I can tell you, from the very first day when I knocked on doors, talked to people, I got a rush coming over me that I really enjoyed this. And as they say, the rest is history. My first elections, both as a councillor, as mayor, and as MPP, were always very close. But after that, I was fortunate enough to be re-elected a number of times.
How much of it is a feeling that you could accomplish something with respect to the community?
Oh, I think you get that feeling more when you serve locally. Locally, you're basically running on a non-party basis, and when you've got a good idea and you're able to convince the majority of the councillors around that idea, you can make something happen right away. I can remember one of the issues that was around back in the late 70s and early 80s was the whole idea of having outdoor restaurants. And I can tell you there were people within the restaurant community that simply did not want it to happen because they somehow felt that if you have patios, things like that, that it was going to hurt their business. And that was just one issue. Mm-hmm. There were a whole bunch of other issues as well. And the other thing I should say right at the outset, I think that we live in a community here in Kingston that is truly unique in a Canadian setting. Now, I know that most elected people say that they're about their own community. But when you look at our history, when you look at the fact that we were the capital of Canada at one time, and that as a result thereof, we've got all these limestone buildings around that were built in the 1840s and home private buildings that never would have happened otherwise. When you look at our whole general physical location and then all the tremendous institutions that we have here, Queen's, RMC, you can just go on and on down the line, a hospital that's second to none when it comes to acute care is concerned. We're very fortunate to live in a community that's still livable. You can still get from one place to the other in 5-10 minutes, and people get upset they have to wait at the next traffic light. But we're really blessed that way, and so it was a great feeling to be involved in as vibrant a community as we are here in Kingston.
Okay, Mark.
I guess my introduction into politics. Probably around 2004, 2005, before that municipal election in 2006, a good friend of mine worked at KEDCO. And this was right around the time that KEDCO was going through a lot of turmoil in terms of its trying to identify itself. What we're seeing recently is actually just a coming full circle again. But there was quite a bit of anxiety in the community over Cadco. And this was also around the time that the city was looking at building the Alvec, which is now the K-Rock Center downtown. And there was just a lot of discussion going on in the community about that. And my friend who worked at Cadco, we used to get in a lot of debates over various different issues. And I can remember the emails that we would send back and forth, just debating various different things going on in the community. And then finally, when the election was nearing, I thought, maybe I'll run for city council. And and so I put my name in the Portsmouth district, which I lived actually just outside of it at the time. And after I was elected, I ended up moving into the district. But that's where I was elected, in the Portsmouth district. And I really enjoyed it right from the beginning. It is a great sense of satisfaction when you get to be involved in decisions that will really affect your community. And like my father was saying, I think that one of the best parts about being involved in municipal politics is just being able to see tangible results at the end of the day. If you put money into a park, a year later you can see a new park. It's a lot more difficult to see those results at the federal level now. But that's what really got me involved in municipal politics. And then, of course, Mayor Rosen at the time, Harvey Rosen, had indicated that he wasn't going to run again, and a number of people encouraged me to run for mayor. So I put my name forward to run for mayor, and I was elected to be mayor. Then about just a little over 2 years ago, I was ready to run again for mayor when we heard our previous MP, Ted Hsu, announced suddenly that he wasn't going to run again as the Member of Parliament for Kingston and the Islands. And by that point, I had got to know Justin Trudeau. He had come through town a few times. I had met him and talked to him as mayor. I had actually had a fundraiser for him during his leadership campaign, and I really identified with the politics that he was talking about. And so it didn't take me long after about 4 or 5 nights, sleepless nights, discussing it with my wife Vanessa, that I would put my name forward to be part of that team, and that style of politics that he was talking about. And that's how I got involved in federal politics. So for me, it was never really a plan. And I think that's probably the most ironic thing, or the surprising thing to most people. I think people think that because my father was in politics, I naturally defaulted there too. But I can probably say that when I first said that I was going to run for city council, probably the two most surprised people were my parents at the time.
We were shocked. Because to be quite honest with you, Dave, that during all of my political activities, Mark was involved to some extent. He always liked building stuff, so he was basically involved in putting up signs and things like that, but he was never really actively involved, and we never really got any idea that he wanted to get into politics until I remember my wife telling me in the summer of 2006, she said, I think Mark wants to run for council. Don't you make fun of him when he mentions it? And I said, why would I do that? But we were, and I know people may find this hard to believe, but we were really a little bit surprised that he decided to run for council at the time.
We talk about families and the impact that being a politician has on them. I would venture to say that the work schedule for a councillor at City Council is pretty hefty. Mm-hmm. And we know that most people consider that to be a part-time job. At least you're compensated on a part-time basis. Talk about the daytime schedule, or what a councillor does representing a particular district in town.
I found that for your own personal family life, being mayor was easier than being a councillor. Because when you're a councillor, you're on all, 3, 4, 5 committees, maybe a couple boards, and they always meet during the evening because everybody, like you said, is part-time. So I would be gone, 3 or 4 nights a week at various different meetings. Whereas when I was mayor, the majority of what I did was during the daytime, the more regular work schedule, because you're meeting with people that usually that are from different organizations or agencies that are working during the day as well. So, but I mean, it is demanding. Because, some days you might not have anything going on during the day, and it might be a very relaxing day. But then all of a sudden on the weekend, you have 3 or 4 different events to go to on a Saturday, and that really, eats up a lot of your family time. So it's tough. And I think, that it's always going to be challenging for the various different family members that are involved. And in particular, I have a 4-month-old now, and it's tough when I'm in Ottawa for 4 days, and you come home to see that he's, learning how to sit up on his own or starting to giggle or something like that, and you're missing a lot of those firsts.
What about you, John, in terms of the relationship between councillors and a mayor?
Oh, well, for a mayor, it's most important that you build up a good relationship with the councillors. And I can honestly say that at the end of the day, after my 8 years as mayor, I had a good relationship with all of my councillors. We didn't always agree on everything by any means, and some, sometimes it's like they pot shots at various things, including the mayor, etc. But generally speaking, a mayor is only successful if you're able to build that consensus that is required in order to move anything forward. And it's a little bit different than provincial and federal politics, because there you have a party system, and when you've got a majority government, basically the party in power can do whatever it wants.
That's right.
Subject to the limits that if it goes too far, then the press will get critical, the general public will get critical, and you get probably punished for it in the next election. But the reality is that a majority government can pretty well put any piece of legislation that it wants through the House, because eventually it has to. At the local level, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Each and every issue, and different people may line up depending upon what their interest is, on different issues.
And I think that's one of the things that I always found frustrating when I was on city council, is that people would say, well, it was a 7-6 vote, but what they didn't realize is that it wasn't always the same 7 and 6 people. People had the ability to line up behind issues that they believed in. And yeah, there was, often there were people that would vote similarly quite often, but it wasn't always like that. And sometimes the media and the spin that comes out of the media makes it perceive as though people aren't getting along on council. But 95% of the time, people could get along great and could find common ground that they could be happy with a compromise on. And that's always important, is to really push the idea of consensus and compromise. And I'll be the first to say that my father was probably a little bit better at it than I was. I think, if anything, I had a bit of a temper at times that it was tough to control. But it's it's the different personalities and how they interact with the different people that you're working with.
Mark, when you talked a little bit earlier about the amount of time that you had to put in as a councillor or as a mayor, you obviously do that because you think you can accomplish something. So go back to your time as councillor or mayor and give me something that you were particularly proud of that you saw accomplished during your term.
Oh, when I was city councillor, I think that the thing that I was the proudest of seeing move forward was the revitalization of Lake Ontario Park. That was another thing that had frustrated me before getting involved on council. Was I could remember Lake Ontario Park when going there as a kid and the joy that my generation got out of it as children growing up. There was a midway, and it was what it was back then, and I respected the fact that it might not look the same way that it did back in the 80s, but Lake Ontario Park could be a place that families could go to and families could enjoy. So, really pushing the agenda of revitalizing Lake Ontario Park. And at times it was tough because, a dog park wanted to utilize half of the land, and, people wanted different things. And it was always, there was always a sympathetic ear one place or another. But, that was probably the thing that I was most proud of when I was a council. When I was mayor, I was very proud of the fact that we were able to continue to delivering the services, not cut any city services, and at the same time have the lowest tax rate that the city had seen since it had amalgamated in 1998. That may have been a bit of timing, because I happened to be there after a number of good policies had been put in place to make sure that the tax stream was healthy to support the city. But it was very rewarding to work with a council that demanded certain services and that the city provide those, but at the same time respect the fact that there's a lot of seniors out there that couldn't afford a 4 or 5% tax increase.
Mm-hmm. John, what about you, going back to your time on city council?
Well, I think that...
Can you remember that far back?
Yes, I can remember that far.
I was waiting for that.
Keith Norton and I, Keith, of course, was our provincial member for 10 years, and we both came on council at the same time as two young bucks in our early 30s. I think we were probably 31, 32. And one of the things that we did was we insisted that all the committee meetings be opened up. Because before that, many of the committee meetings were not opened up. Finance committee wasn't opened up and things like that.
What do you mean opened up?
The general public could not be there.
Really? I didn't know that.
Sometimes the media was excluded. And so there was a whole movement, I think, in the 70s to open up government in general. And there was some reluctance by some of the more senior members on council at the time. But that's certainly one of the things that I can remember. And I can also remember we started the initial revitalization of the downtown. I can remember when the first reconstruction took place along Princess Street and various other places, etc. When I first came on council, it was very difficult to walk down Ontario Street past, let's say, the Prince George Hotel. It had been an industrial area. The Canadian Locomotive had been there. The steamship company had been there, etc. And people just didn't go down there. And yeah, there was some controversy with respect to some of the high-rise buildings that were built, etc. But the reality is, it was always my feeling that if you want to make sure we have a viable downtown, you've got to bring people into the downtown. And what better way to bring them in there than to actually have them live there? And so a lot of the residential redevelopment that took place around City Hall, I think, has been one of the reasons why our downtown has remained relatively stable and it's in good state. But there was an awful lot of controversy around Block D. Probably the biggest regret that I personally have is that we had an opportunity to buy Block D as a city back within about the first 6 months when I became mayor. That would have been in early 1981. We offered Rollins Construction and Sonia Nielsen Real Estate at the time $1.5 million. On a 7-6 vote, they came back and wanted close to $2 million, and we said no. And as a result, the controversy about Block D went on for many, many years, and it was ultimately sold much later for mega millions of dollars after that. So the regret that I have is that I wasn't in the job long enough to be able to persuade council to buy Block D. Could we have done something better than what's there right now, or we probably would have done it in a different way? I don't know. But I think it would have been I firmly believe that the city should control as much of the waterfront access as possible around the city. And what better way than the city to actually own the majority of the waterfront and then have it redeveloped according to the way it wants to do it, and with a lot of input from the citizens, etc. So that's sort of one regret, and also one thing that I think that changed quite a bit in the 1980s. But as Mark is saying, it's been so long ago that I've forgotten a lot of things. If you ask me about what my accomplishments were locally from a provincial viewpoint, I think the building of the Providence Care Hospital has always been my main priority ever since we got into government back in 2003. It was a promise that was made by the previous government in 1998 that never materialized, and to me it's not so much about the people that run the hospital, it's not so much about the people that work there, it's all about giving those people that are going to be in that hospital for an awful long period of time. A lot of people at St. Mary's Lake Hospital and at the Ontario Psychiatric Hospital are there for a long period of time, and they should get healing in the most pleasantest of environments. Right. And I can't think of a better place than where the hospital is being built and going to be open early next year.
Well, that's a perfect segue, because I was going to move into you deciding to run for the provincial seat after about, 7 or 8 years?
7 years.
After you had finished being mayor?
Well, in 1988, I think my wife, Assunta, rightly said, that's it. You've had 8 years of that, and our children were teenagers then. You better come home and spend some more time here. And, so I went back to my law practice on a full-time basis. And in the summer of 1994, I kept getting calls late in the evening from Lynn MacLeod, who was then the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party. And I had never met Lynn before, and she urged me to seek the nomination. And, of course, Ken Keyes had been our provincial member during the Peterson years. And I said, well, I'm not going to run against Ken. We're good friends. If he wants the nomination, I'm not going to battle anybody for the nomination, particularly a friend of mine. But he eventually decided not to run. And a lot of people forget that going into the 1995 election, around May the 1st, which was a month before the election, the Liberals provincially were at 50%, and I think Mike Harrison, the Conservatives, at 25%, and he was able to turn that around within a month. And at the end of the day, I was barely elected, beating out some very good candidates, Sally Barnes, for whom I felt a lot of respect, and Wilson, Gary Wilson, who was a librarian here at Queen's, etc., two really nice people and good people, etc. And at the end of the day, I was fortunate enough to get elected, being the only Liberal, I think, at that time between Ottawa and Scarborough. And I always attribute it to the fact that maybe I'd been out of local politics long enough at that stage, which was 7 years, that people only remembered the good stuff and forgot the bad stuff, and said, well, maybe we should send this guy to Toronto.
The difference between sitting on council and being in the legislature in Toronto, from your perspective?
Oh my gosh, we could spend a whole hour and a half on that. I can tell you, certainly the partisanship is something that is by and large unknown at the local level. We try to work with people on all issues. And yeah, some people approach things more from the left than the right, but you kind of work together if you want to get anything done. At the provincial level, it's totally different, particularly when you may recall that the Harris government in 95 got a huge majority. So whatever the opposition said really didn't matter much as far as their program is concerned. And the notion that here I had been mayor before that, when you had some say in the city, or at least you were part of the redevelopment of the city, working together with management, and we have some great city staff people here, as well as council, to being in a position where basically all you can do is critique what's happening at the provincial level. There's no comparison between local government, in my view, and provincial government. And of course, I spent 8 years in opposition, and then I was fortunate enough to be part of the McGuinty and the Wynne governments after that. And that was totally, totally different, because now you can accomplish something again. I always made sure during my opposition years, quite frankly, that I had a good relationship with the Minister of Health, because of our health complex here in Kingston, and the Minister of Training College and Universities, because, we've got St. Lawrence College and Queen's here. They're major institutions, all three of those institutions, and I always thought it was very important that we have the best kind of relationships possible with the provincial government. But I can remember when I was first elected, there was a great fear within these institutions that, my gosh, for the first time in 70 years, we have elected an opposition member. What do we do with him? And of course, I knew all the people at Queen's and General Hospital and places like that because of my involvement locally. I just went around the first 6 months and I said, it's okay. I will never make any comment that will be to the detriment of this community and your organization. If you want to help, if you want me to come with you to meet with various ministers, if you want me to set up those meetings, that's fine. If you think I'm going to be a hindrance, because there was this perception that if you have an opposition member, the government isn't willing to do as much for that riding. I totally discount that, by the way. Yeah. That really doesn't happen, that people have this perception that because if a government is smart enough and it wants to win those ridings, it better do something for those ridings as well, for the next time around. Anyway, it was a fascinating experience. And I'll say this, if you go into provincial or federal politics, it's much better to start in the opposition and then work your way into government rather than the other way around.
And it doesn't really matter whether you're on the opposition side or on the government side. You still have to have people skills, and you still have to believe in the art of the compromise.
Look, they used to say that the best politicians are the people that are probably in opposition because they got elected in spite of waves of popularity of the other side, etc. And look, the reality is, everybody that runs for office and wins, you have no idea on that night whether you're going to be on a side that has the majority of seats or not. Right. And so, there was a tendency sometimes by some of my own colleagues and also by some of the Harris ministers to kind of discount opposition members. And I always thought that was totally the wrong thing to do. They represent their community as much as the government members do on the other side. They get elected the same way, and they have absolutely no influence as to whether or not their party gets the majority of the seats or not.
That's right. Mark, you decided last fall, after Ted Chu decided he wasn't going to run, to move to the federal level. How have you found that experience working as an MP in Ottawa and comparing it to your time as a city councillor and mayor?
Well, I mean, like we've heard, it's much different in the sense that when you're mayor, you try to build consensus, but it's not always within the same group of people. Quite often, when I was mayor, I would be in support of a particular issue where a city councillor might not, but then on the next issue, that city councillor was supportive, or at least had the same view that I did. So you had the ability to work with people, whether they're supportive or you're trying to build compromise or whatever it might be. But definitely when you move into a situation like provincial or federal, in my case, where you're part of a party, you're now towing the line, so to speak, of the party. It has its pros. I mean, the benefit to it is that you accept the fact that I might not agree with everything, but by and large, we have the same values and principles of how to deliver services to the community. So at times it can be frustrating because you can't really speak exactly what you think. You have to be tempered in your responses. But at other times, you know that other people who might not necessarily be 100% on board with something that you believe in will also be coming, and contributing to that because they will be interested in seeing good government come through this idea that we belong to a party, we belong to and believe in certain values and common objectives. So I've found that it's at times frustrating, but at the same time rewarding in the sense that you have the ability to have some greater and bigger accomplishments when you're working with so many like-minded people.
We could spend a lot more time talking about this, but we've run out of time on the program today. I want to thank you both for coming in and chatting with us. And I'd also like to thank you for your service to the public by virtue of your time at City Council and in the Provincial Legislature, John, and yours, Mark, for your time at City Council and federally.
I want to thank you, David. You and I have known each other for a long period of time from your days when you were at the other radio stations, if I can put it that way. And I've always appreciated the fact that you're a very honest, open, tough interviewer, but you've also got the community's best interest at heart from your perspective as a broadcaster.
Well, thanks very much.
Thank you.
That's our program for this week. Thanks for listening.
This show is produced in collaboration with CFRC at Queen's University, Kingston, Ontario, with infrastructure support from Queen's Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science. CFRC is located on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. Find more great podcasts at podcasts.cfrc.ca.